So this is the first time I'm ever chairing a discussion, so bear with me. It might be dreadful, but these two ladies are not dreadful. They are amazing. I met both of them at a conference in February, I think, a conference that was titled Creative Changemakers, and was all about the creative industries and how we can tackle issues like climate change from those different industries. And yeah, if you would like to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Harriet Kingaby. I am co-chair of something called the Conscious Advertising Network, and our mission is to help the ethics catch up with the technology of modern advertising. And I'm also a Mozilla Fellow, so I'm looking at AI enhanced advertising and how we make it net positive.
That's exciting. Hi, I'm Vineeta. You can hear me? Yay. I co-run Wholegrain Digital. It's a WordPress web design agency. That's the disguise for all of the sustainability silly things we want to do in the background. We get very excited about anything to do with sustainability. So we are certified B-Corp. We contribute 1% of our revenue, not profit, to 1% for the planet. And just get involved in all sustainability initiatives. Like we recently launched website Carbon. Not sure how many of you have used it. It allows you to check your website footprint, carbon footprint for your website. We launched a sustainability web manifesto and got 700 other individuals to get involved. There's lots of little things that we start as a internal project, and then they sort of snowball. So that's who I am.
Cool. I wrote down a bunch of questions that I have. So I think I'm just going to kick off with a bit of a personal one, I guess. How long has the climate crisis been part of your life, and what about it makes you, how does it make you feel, basically?
Okay. So when I was about 16, I had a chemistry teacher, and he was really, really passionate about climate change. And we weren't the most studious chemistry group, might I say. And we worked out that actually if we got him to talk about climate change, then he would talk for most of the lesson, and we could kind of get away with doing a bit less. Which was actually brilliant for me because it was really, really inspiring. He was really passionate about it, and he, kind of really made me want to study environmental science at university. So I went and did that, and I think my career has been kind of, defined by that ever since, really. So thanks, Mr. Brown. And how does it make me feel? I guess I've been working in climate change communications for a really, really, really long time, and it used to make me feel hopeful, and now it just makes me feel like we've got to without swearing too much, we've just got to get on with it.
You can swear.
Can I? We just got to fucking get on with it. So I feel kind of ignited and re-energized by the energy that's come back around to the whole debate.
That's very nice and positive.
I can't remember, but I think it sort of coincided with about 2006, 2005. When I lived in India, I didn't think of climate change because there's just rubbish everywhere. So your main problem is actually sorting out local problems, like having corners of the street filled up with rubbish, or just noise pollution, air pollution. So you're not actually thinking about climate change. You're thinking of immediate issues that you want to solve. It's only when I came to the UK, on a flight, of course, when you arrive, people are talking about like organic food and all of these things. I had never really thought about these things. So I came in 2004 to this country, and it wasn't very long after I started seeing these exciting things. I was like, oh, that thing is 1.5 times the price. What did they do to make it 1.5 times? You sort of start questioning things. It's just around the time I met Tom, my husband. Now we run the business together. He was my flatmate, and he used to go on and on about climate change, and it really didn't occur to me what he was talking about until there was the flat that I grew up in, Bombay. They were refurbishing the building. So they had taken the facade off, and then there was a storm, and there was the storm meant that the rain got through to the bedroom, my childhood bedroom. And my parents said, "Oh, sorry, we've lost all of your childhood memories." And I was like, nothing to go back to that bedroom for. It sounds silly, but I was so much, well, I am, but I was so much more materialistic back then. I just felt really sad that I had lost that. And I think it's until it doesn't touch you, the effect that something odd happened. It was like, it wasn't even the monsoon season when that storm came. It's when Tom said, "Oh, that is climate change." I said, "Is that what climate change is?" So it was almost like a revelation. So it wasn't, I can't remember when it actually was something that I learned about, because it was something that Tom went on about, until it actually affected me. And that's when I think I realized what it meant and what's going to happen. Yeah.
Related to that now, did that then also influence your decision to start Wholegrain Digital? Was that part of it?
Yeah, quite a bit. And by background, I'm an electronics engineer, so I went on to study satellite communication. That's why I came to the UK. And I used to be testing electrical circuits, making interlocking systems as my graduate job. I really enjoyed it until I started thinking about these PCBs coming in these polystyrene boxes from China. And I remember feeling really silly, because I went to our, not sustainability person in the office, but he was like an office manager come other things that you could talk about. I went along to his office and said, could we swap the things in the washing up liquid to Ecova, or should we ask our suppliers to send PCBs in cardboard? And he just gave me that look. You're crossing the line. He gave me that look, and I just realized, eeks, I'm not going to be able to make any difference here. And I know it sounds silly, but I wasn't very excited about engineering anyway. So when Tom said, "Let's start a company," I said, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it together." That's what we did. Yeah. And it was to help green companies stand out from the crowd, because back then they used to look like, no, I know we still look like hippies, but they used to really look like hippies, with terrible fonts and like jaggedy fonts, and they didn't look like Waitrose. They didn't look cool. They looked just not very appealing. So we wanted to bring the appealing look and feel to eco-friendly products. That's why we started with sustainable branding, and then got into websites for those same clients. Yeah.
That, I guess, leads me on to a question for Harriet about things being appealing in the ad industry as well, I guess, and what impact does like greenwashing and stuff like that and making things look appealing and green now have on people and society as a whole and companies and everything?
So we used to have a graph, or a kind of about 2012 we used to have a graph, and it was looking at who actually were the green consumers. And we had, at the time, there was like a lot of, we'd had green was the new black in 2007, and then everyone got, and then all the greenwash kind of hit the, got mainstreamed, and people got a bit, they sniffed it out, and they realised that actually, that not a lot was happening. And then you had this kind of backlash of eco-fatigue where people felt over the top. And about 2012, we had this graph, and it said, this percent of consumers, and it was about 18%, you could say, no, it was about 12%, you could say, were kind of deep green, and they would change their behaviour, and they would do anything for, they would pay a bit extra, and they would, engage in green. And the rest of us, there's some hardcore deniers, probably about 11% there, who didn't want anything to do with it and thought it was nothing to do with them. And then most people in the middle were, kind of likely to adopt one or two, kind of green behaviours, might switch switch to eco-over, might change their toilet roll, etc. But as long as it didn't cost too much, and as long as it wasn't too inconvenient. And so for years we had these green comms that were like, kind of, it's easy, it's really simple, it's really, it's really nice to do. And then XR came along and they said, we're going to ask you to do some really tough stuff. And it's really, really, really changed, I think, the scope of what we can ask people to do. Back to the ad industry, I think we've got a real problem with greenwashing. I don't know if anyone was relentlessly targeted with fossil fuel company adverts around the XR protests. A lot of nodding heads here. Yeah, I got a load of Exxon knows kind of propaganda targeted at me every time I logged onto Twitter. I saw BP were doing a mass kind of campaign where they were placing ads in public places, in print magazines, presumably to, actually show annoyed people that, who'd had their journey to work inconvenienced by XR, that, actually we're really nice, we're doing a lot, we're dedicating a lot of energy and money to these green resources. So we're complicit in that as an industry. I think that's a real problem. I think that there's a lot there that we have to ask ourselves big questions about. But on the flip side, we've got brilliant movements of people who are looking at different things. So the Conscious Advertising Network, we're all about, our big focus at the moment is around funding of harmful content. So we're looking at how you defund climate misinformation and how you help brands do that, because most of them don't want to be against climate denial. A lot of brands are investing a lot of energy into really kind of good sustainability. I think more so in the last few years, more kind of sustainability efforts. They don't want to be next to it. The Guardian have said we don't run it anymore because it counteracts our policy. We've got people like the purpose disruptors, Create and Strike, who are looking at how we create better communications. So there's great stuff going on. It's just not all joined up. And I think we have to have some serious conversations with ourselves about who we work with, and the kind of, whether we work with high carbon clients in the long term.
In terms of who we work with, Vineeta, how does that work for Wholegrain Digital? Because I know that you choose your clients quite carefully, but if any of the companies of the people that are here today would adopt a policy where they say they don't want to work with a specific kind of clients anymore, how tricky is that, and how do you balance that, and how did you get to that point, and is it easy? It's probably not easy.
No, it's not easy. The first few years you're really, really poor, and you accept it. You say, fine, this is what life is. What do you prioritize? But if you have children, you have bills to pay, and you just have to take the job that comes through the door at that point. But we were in a privileged position that we decided to just hold off and wait for the right clients. And it did mean that it took a while to get the sort of clients we wanted. I'm about to sound really out there, but if you wish hard enough, it'll come. You gotta just close your eyes, set the intention, mean it that you want those clients. Name the client that you want. Give it a few years. If you put the right messages out, don't Twitter stalk them. That's not what I mean. If you put the right thoughts out, it will happen. We started in 2007. Tom and I wrote down the list of clients. The 3 clients we wanted to work with were Marks and Spencer's, Solar Century, the largest solar panel provider in Europe, and Ecover. And by 2012, 2014, 2012, 2014, 2017, we had all 3 on our books. It took 10 years. It takes a while. You just have to accept that these things take a while. And we have an ethical policy, like you might have read already. You can look it up. It's at Wholegrain Digital /ethical policy, and we have a screening process that we go through. And yes, it's hard to say no. So we have very diplomatic emails that we have crafted, that we say things like, sorry, we're too busy at the moment, or it's just not the right time, or we have another client in the same sector. We make stuff up sometimes when it's too hard to say the truth. There have been points at which we have actually straight off denied. There was a German yogurt company that came through the door, and they said they actually started off saying they were a healthy product. So Tom engaged in the conversation. Next day the lady came to the office. Then we realized it was yogurt. Dairy is one of our dairy, meat, alcohol. There's some industries we won't work with. And it was really embarrassing because now she was in front of us. That was a hard one. to say it to someone's face is harder. So cut it off as quickly as you can before you have to see their face to face. That sounds rough, but
brutal,
yeah.
but yeah. I guess one question that I have in here as well is in terms of tech professionals being part of Climate Action Tech and maybe people who own their own companies as well. How do you think they can step up their game, or where do you think opportunities for people working in tech to get sustainability a bit higher in the list of priorities?
I mean, I really agreed with the advice before that actually it doesn't have to be, you can start smaller, and you can start by, really just working out where you can, using groups such as ClimateAction.tech and other, kind of available tools to try and work out where your entry point is. So the Conscious Advertising Network, we are, we're completely voluntary, and everything we've produced is open source. So the idea is we wanted to scale as quickly as possible. And what we have 6 manifestos, and what we've done is gather kind of industry professionals, gathered kind of experts from those fields. So they're things like we don't specifically do climate, but that's an area. I know that's an area that other organisations are looking into. But what we say, what we've tried to do is map where kind of organisations can take action. So for children's welfare, we recommend particular kind of pieces of technology, or we recommend particular standards that people can work to. And the idea is we also have a free audit tool. So any agency, ad tech company, kind of advertiser can look at where they're performing really well, look at where they're performing less well, and choose their entry points from there. So they might say, hey, we're absolutely killing it on ad fraud, but we've got some problems when it comes to what we're doing around, or kind of informed consent, or kind of funding climate denial. And then that allows them to kind of like embed those standards. And we've not tried to kind of rewrite the rule book or anything like that. We've just pulled together stuff that's out there and fill in the gaps. So there's tools out there like that. There's there's initiatives that exist. I would just say find something that feels right for making, for kind of dealing with your low-hanging fruit. If you make things, there's great production standards like AdGreen that can help you. Just find the thing that feels good for you and just get going, because behaviour change doesn't necessarily come before attitude change. Often behaviour change comes first, and then attitude change comes afterwards, because that's the way our brains work. So if you're a company that's just kind of getting going and doing something, it becomes an easier sell to say, hey, this is great, we should do more. I think just find it and get going.
In terms of funding climate denial and stuff like that as well, and AI, in terms of like all of that, where do you see that going, and tech industries' influence on that?
Yes. So COP26 is coming up in November. It's going to be in Glasgow, and I don't know whether anyone remembers the 2018, this would be quite specialist knowledge if you do, so the 2018 UN Global Compact on Migration. Anyone remember that? It was a non-binding agreement that the UN kind of drafted, and the idea was that it would enshrine, it would kind of refresh and enshrine but not legally binding kind of rights around migration. And that was subject to a huge misinformation campaign. Something really, really coordinated in many languages kind of got around the far right kind of press, and that was that if it was enshrined, if companies ratified it, then countries ratified it, then it would mean that criticising migration was illegal. Totally rubbish. In the UK, it was pitched as an EU initiative. The UN has nothing to do with the EU, so it was just playing into the fears at the time. And it appeared in tabloids like the News of the World as fact. That was supported by advertising. It appeared on Rebel Media from Canada. That was supported by advertising. It appeared in, kind of on far-right YouTube channels. They were supported by advertising. And we saw brands and organisations, consultancies that work in sustainability, brands that have, kind of climate science-based climate targets advertising on this content. And we're just really concerned that the same thing could happen again. So one of the things that we're looking at is how we help the British advertisers to avoid funding this kind of climate denial, because it is not in the far right's interest for us to solve climate change. It will require us to be more tolerant of migration as climatic regions shift and people are displaced. It's going to require us to cooperate across countries. And to be honest with you, that's not something that fits with their agenda. So we have to be extremely careful that we're not going to make the same mistakes again. And I don't know if there's some great Medium articles on how AI can propagate this kind of misinformation. Algorithms can prioritize it on platforms because it gets more engagement, more clicks, more likes, more shares, because it's salacious, it's, something that's triggering. Kind of when you find fake news being spread on social media and you find that lots of people are engaging with it, check how many of those people are actually bots. There's huge bot networks that are literally set up to propagate this kind of stuff and skew conversations. There's a huge AI propaganda machine that sits alongside this stuff. So
scary.
It's scary, but it is avoidable. We can do something about it. We know how. We've got the tools. We've just got to be aware, and that's my piece of doom mongering for the day. Like, honestly, it is positive.
Vineeta, back to my previous question, I guess, of how tech professionals, what influence they can have, and where you see tech professionals and their role in making sustainability more of a thing.
In their personal lives or in their professional lives?
Both.
Or anyway. Set yourself a roadmap. It's hard to straight away go vegan. Start with quitting one thing at a time or adding one thing at a time. So it's a bit like, instead of going to the pub, go for a walk. The same thing. Instead of so every action you take, if you replace it with a positive action, you're just filling that time with the positive things. So in the evening, instead of watching Netflix, go on Climate Tech Action Slack channel, make a friend who talks about it. It's just small positive actions to replace the negative actions that you make every day will get you there. If you are a roadmap type of person, which I'm not much of a roadmap type of person, but I have one. I loosely follow it. There's a goal at the end, and I don't necessarily track the percentage of progress, but I've got milestones along the way, and I quite enjoy when I reach there. I treat myself a bit. So you can set yourself goals depending on how far you want to push yourself. Yeah.
I guess that counts for both personal action and action within the company, like if you want to start a green team or stuff like that.
Well, with the company, you can set real goals. Like you want to go carbon neutral by so-and-so date, carbon net zero by a certain date, and then what positive actions you're going to take, what positive actions your team's going to take. And you can sneakily do things if you're at the top of the food chain, luckily. You can do things like, say, by 2021, you want to go carbon neutral or carbon positive or whatever you can call it. Which means that, sorry, all meals are plant-based, I'm sorry. Sorry, now we're going to have to use electric trains. Oh, you have to drive an electric car. Sorry, can't take fossil fuel taxis. And you sort of can, but if you suddenly add a rule, you just look like a dictator. But if you have a roadmap, your whole team sees what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. You're not just introducing these scary things in their life without an intention. And they all have bought into the idea of going carbon neutral with you. So you can see, when you introduce a little milestone and say, this is what we're planning to do. So when we introduced Climate Perks last year, Climate Perks was an incentive for our team members to take trains for their holiday instead of flying. So we said we'll give you extra holiday either side, 1 day each, once a year. So when some of us, not me, but some of my team members went skiing, they took the train instead of flying. So they got 2 extra holidays. They're so cheeky. They left at 4:30 in the morning and got an entire extra day on the other side. But it just then this sort of notion propagates, you know. Then they all started doing it. and they all started getting extra holidays. And then, so you have to introduce a few perks while you're taking things away as well. So you have a choice of just making money off every, pinching every penny from the business, or introducing things that actually make other people make positive actions in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a roadmap, you can introduce things and get people interested along the way. Does that?
Yeah. Climate Perks, by the way, if you don't know about it, is a company that you can get your company to sign up to as well. They do exactly what Vineeta said, and support businesses to encourage their employees to go on holidays by train and give them the extra day. So they're quite cool. I guess, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I have one more question. It was International Women's Day yesterday, and yeah. And I mean, the relatedness and closeness of the climate crisis and equality in general is undeniable. So yeah, any comments on that? I mean, you can also just agree with me because it's true. But yeah.
Do you want to get this? I don't mind.
I don't mind. Do you want to start?
Sure. I'm going to sound really controversial here, but I have a real bee in my bonnet about equality. I really think that the people who are suffering the most are the young people, and it doesn't matter what gender they are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what gender I am, you are, or anybody in this room is. We all are going to be in a real tough place.
Yeah.
So every day should be an Earth Day. I think, yes, there is a real problem with gender pay gap and all sorts of things, but when it comes down to it, International Women's Day is a brilliant day, but I also feel like men start feeling quite left out.
There is an International Men's Day as well, though.
But nobody talks about it.
That's true. That's true.
Nobody talks
Oops.
about it. So I do feel like that's also then sort of overcasts the gender neutral people who have not decided not to identify with the gender, and it starts getting really murky. So I feel like there needs to be sort of a yay day where everybody just sort of becomes nice about
International
everything.
Humanity Day.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I don't know if I digressed.
Gosh, I mean, yeah, I think to that point about there is an International Men's Day, I wish every day was International kind of like Women's Day. But I don't know. I mean, I still feel there was some really damning research that was done. I forget who it was by, but it showed some really shocking things. It showed that I think 90% of the people surveyed still had some form of bias against women in leadership positions. This was a global survey, and or felt that women weren't suited for particular professions or didn't have or lacked particular qualities when it. And I read that and I just actually wanted to curl up in a little ball and cry. But equally, I think this is why it's really, really important that we ensure that we have women at every stage or every kind of stage of our organisations as much as possible, and that we really do try and address this, this gap. And that also we're compassionate in the way that we talk to women online, and that we, kind of deal with women on social media. I know that people like Diane Abbott, for example, are very, very clear about the fact that she's a woman of colour, attracts some of the worst abuse possible. We've had women hounded off of Twitter. We've had, kind of a woman hounded out of the country quite recently. And so I really feel like there's a real need for compassion and empathy on social and online and in the way that we deal with things, and there's a real need for action in terms of closing those gaps around the representation of women, at all levels, particularly in tech, because we know that there's a specific gap there. So yeah.
Okay, I think with that we're going to open up to questions from the audience.
Thank you. To follow up on what you've just said, Harriet, and maybe I misunderstood the agenda today, but I remember seeing the word diversity, and we only just touched on it. So I would like to ask you both what you feel are the most important messages to convey, possibly around climate justice, and I think climate justice simply. I think it's a message that doesn't quite come across. I think the tech community. So it's a great opportunity to hear from you guys.
Okay, so I have two thoughts on the idea of climate justice, and the first of which is that the conversation around climate needs to be inclusive and representative of both people who are affected by it and the people that are taking action on it. So I think one thing that the climate justice framing does very, very well is it talks about, and it sets out to include people from the global south who are affected by climate change, because I think we, in the UK specifically, I think we have a tendency to think of, to think of climate change in specific demographics or, specific communities, and it is a global problem that affects people globally. My other thought on climate justice is that we need to ensure that we continue to project the idea of climate change as a fixable thing. So this is very much stolen from a guy from Futerra called Ollie Lauder, but it's this idea of actually, if we talk about climate change and we talk about kind of our roles, we need to know that we can fix it. And I think sometimes the problem with framing of climate justice is we have this inbuilt thing within ourselves where we go, yeah, but the world's unfair. And I think that can hold us back from really understanding that we can fix the problem. So I think alongside that narrative has got to come the one of like, if we can sort this out, then we can also we can fix a lot of the things that intersect with climate change, that concern us and that are our priorities. So we can create a better kind of a better and more just world for us, but also for people across the globe. Does that make sense? It's a bit garbled, but
Hi, thanks for your talk. I'm curious, what kind of metrics you use to judge how sustainable a company's business practices are. So obviously, at one extreme, you might have fossil fuel companies or renewable energy companies, but in the middle, there are ones delivering goods and services, which might be quite hard to calculate the impact of.
This is for me.
Both of you.
Our ethical policy depends, has really got sectors in it that we won't work with. And sometimes it does get me into a funny territory where somebody's doing something really positive, but then in a sector that's actually on my red list, the list of red people. For example, we did work with them anyway. A company really close to my heart, Toast Ale, they use waste bread to make ale, and it was on my list to not work with people who sell alcohol. And then I had to change that rule because actually what they're doing is fighting food waste. So it's not just about numbers sometimes. It's not as straightforward as how you're going to measure if somebody's doing something positive or negative. You have to actually take your own bias or your views into consideration of what they're actually trying to achieve. In terms of emission calculation, we're not on that spectrum where we can decide which company is polluting more other than sectors. We don't have enough knowledge to do that other than actual digital footprint of their websites. That's what we know how to calculate things like finding out their server, are they on a green host, are they actually using green energy to power their hosting, what sort of performance their website has so that the amount of transfer is quicker and so on. So I don't know the answer to how we would measure based on sustainability, how sustainable the company is. Sorry.
What would I do? Good question. Metrics is not my forte, but what I can say is that what we encourage with CAN, because we're a voluntary organisation and because we're looking more into compliance this year. We launched in June last year, so we're kind of getting our head up. We've got getting kind of our head around how we do that. But what we do encourage people to do is to do an audit of them and their operations based on the principles of the manifestos, and we say, okay, find areas that you need to, find areas that you're absolutely smashing. Don't worry about them. Find areas that you need to improve, and find the low-hanging fruit, and then report back on those. And we encourage, where there are tools that, like I mentioned, AdGreen. AdGreen is a tool for, kind of measuring how green the production of your adverts is. So things like, are you recycling particular materials? Are you, can you minimize the number of drops you use in a van? Can you use a, van that's powered by something different? And they offer, I think ways of plugging in particular measurements of offering swaps, etc. So I think there's I think it comes back to the problem that you're trying to solve. If you as a company make things and production is what you're worried about, then that would be the tool for you. If if your metric, if you're a company that buys and sells advertising, then your metrics you're going to be hitting metrics for your clients. And maybe it's a case of saying, well, actually we're going to hit these metrics in different ways and communicate to our clients how we're going to do it. So that's a bit of a politician's answer, but I think it really depends on the problem, and there's tools out there that may fit the problem, and where there's a gap, I think if anyone's got any ideas for doing it, just do it, because someone will want it.
Hi, yeah, so there's been some really big announcements recently, the likes of Microsoft, about the amount of carbon they're going to start to recapture and being carbon positive by 2030, etc. So I suppose announcements like that and others that I'm sure will follow from other companies, they start to people maybe turn a bit of a blind eye and think, oh, that's fine that those big companies are looking after it. So I suppose my question is about the massive overconsumption that we have as a society digitally, and I think that's the thing that sort of keeps me awake in this side of this equation. So I just wondered about your thoughts on that, and how we, I suppose, can educate people, advertise as well about that kind of problem.
Well, you and me both, Neil. You know what we're like. The digital overconsumption you meant. Well, you can't stop people from watching Netflix, and you can't tell them to go and get DVDs. It's going to happen. So actually, we got featured on BBC Politics Live last Friday. Made a proper fool of myself on the BBC last Friday. Anyway, they were asking the similar questions in terms of digital footprint, and our Boris is trying to roll out 5G and all that sort of, in the name of giving information. As soon as things are cheaper, people waste it. I don't know if this relates to the question, but I feel like if electricity was made free right now, we won't switch the lights off in the living room when we go back to the bedroom to go have a nap. And the same thing with digital consumption. If just because things become easier to transfer, there'll be more wastage. So I think there needs to be some sort of carbon tax. We tax ourselves for all of the carbon that we generate, and we have done for a few years now. And we also measure our carbon emissions from every laptop, every team members, every journey. Everything is in an Excel sheet, proper nerdy style Excel sheet, and we compare it year by year to become more sustainable. We also put out our annual report, and going back to the digital consumption, unless you take it seriously for yourself, I don't think it's going to change. And by 2030, it'll be a lot worse. So it's just about raising awareness. I think it's about raising awareness. You can't expect people to stop doing what they're doing. It's a bit like the cheaper the flights get, people are going to fly more. The same way the cheaper the internet's going to get, people are just going to watch it more. It sounds very pessimistic now, but it's just awareness. I think it's awareness.
Oh gosh, yeah. So I had to tackle this one from the CAN perspective. When you load web page on your phone, I mean, half the time it takes to load that isn't the web page loading, it's the ads deciding who's going to show you, kind of that ad, and then it loading the video, and then you getting rid of the pop-up and getting really annoyed and accepting the cookies and all of that crap that comes with it. So on that side of things, there's simple things like advertisers can use the IAB lean standard when they're designing their ad formats, or they're picking which one to use, which kind of just reduces that kind of load time and makes it a bit nicer for the user, makes your advertising more likely to be actually watched and not just got rid of. So there's that kind of stuff. There's obviously the big elephant in the room, which is that advertising incentivizes consumption. That is bad, intrinsically bad for the planet. And there are movements. Like there was, I think there is I don't know how to put it, but there's a moment coming. There's already been think pieces in the drum around advertising's role in driving consumption and looking at that. So I do think there is a moment coming. I don't think it's there yet. I don't think everyone's ready to hear that. But I also think that there's a big. I think there's a movement coming whereby consumers are going to have a bit more say in this whole process. At the moment, consumers are just things to be targeted and, kind of like poked and prodded and be made to buy things. And I think that there is a movement coming where consumers are going to have either a broker, like a personal AI style broker that's loyal to them and not to Amazon or to Google or whatever, that might help them kind of have power in their own online experience and be able to say, actually, I'd like to see more ads I'd like to be recommended more sustainable products. I'd really, I love Veja. I want to know more about sustainable, kind of shoe manufacturers. Or actually, this week I'm feeling a bit vulnerable, or I'm, kind of whatever. And actually, I think I might, exposure to ads might make me more likely to have compulsive behaviour. So I want to be shown less ads. That is, a bit far in the future, but I think that is coming. And there's a project called the GLIA project by a guy called Richard Witt that's looking at that. So I think there's a number of things that are going to change our relationship with consumption and how we're kind of perhaps targeted, and we don't necessarily have the power to redress that balance at the moment. And I think there is a coming movement in advertising. I can't say it's there yet, but hopefully.
I use a browser called Brave. It switches off all of the adverts. It's really good. Even on my phone, Brave works really well.
And there's Firefox Focus is another one. So I just have a question for Harriet. Earlier on, you were talking about like the economics of advertising and the corporate funding of disinformation, right? And like I said earlier, I live in the US, and I'm watching with dread as a machine is whirring up there. I just can't imagine. But anyway, you were talking about the problem earlier for a while, and then you said, there are things we can do, and you felt sort of obliged to stop. I just wanted to invite you to kind of finish that thought and say, for perhaps targeted towards practitioners in tech, whether there's things, advice or ideas that you have specifically for us in relation to positive actions we could take.
Great. So I can give a kind of advertiser's perspective, and I can give a more general perspective. And the advertiser's perspective is that with things like, advertisers can think more cleverly about how they spend their money. So money talks, like advertising funds the internet, whether we want it to or not, the vast swathe of it. And that is a responsibility that I'd like to see more advertisers lean into. And there's ways you can do that. So there's the defunding of the bad stuff, and there's more thinking about, kind of block lists, but, that can kind of get rid of kind of climate denial terms, things like warmist or whatever. We're actually doing a project with the European, or the ECIU, I can't remember the acronym, but we're looking at creating block lists that will help advertisers. But as well as defunding the bad stuff, you can also put your money into the good stuff. So, bad block lists, if you just block global warming or climate change, you'd completely block off the debate. So it's then thinking carefully about where the money goes. So, kind of advertisers can reward publications that have good strategies, that have good journalism, and look to fund them, kind of specifically either through contextual advertising or direct, kind of direct buys, things like that. So there's that kind of stuff. I think for tech practitioners as well, I mean, platforms have a huge role in rethinking their recommendation algorithms. If misinformation, if climate denial is traveling through social media platforms more quickly, then there's a huge role for the platforms to play in changing those algorithms or looking at, kind of how they kind of get rid of that. And Avars have done a brilliant report, if anyone's interested, on how that works, and have got some three really crystal clear asks of platforms like YouTube. As tech practitioners in general, if we know that there's a way that misinformation is affecting what we do, or if we think that there is a way, if we think it's being encouraged by something we work on, then again, there's some brilliant. There's a guy called Emmy Bevensey who's kind of running. I think it's a similar kind of Slack group which is looking at misinformation and how you can spot it, how you can report it. And he's created an open source tool which allows you to search for it as well. So I just think that it's a huge. We're going to see it. It's going to happen, and I just think that any ideas that you have, brilliant. I'm not necessarily particularly technical, but just go for it, because everything that we need, everything that the problem's there, and you guys have got the answers, I'm sure.
On that note, with all of us having all the answers, thank you very much, both of you.